At the beginning of winter, we took this log, brought it to the sawmill, and made lumber out of it.
That's almost enough boards for going across if that's what you want.
We used some of that lumber to build this winter sledge. Then we grabbed a couple chunks of wood like this and made lumber from them as well, which we used to turn the winter sledge into a snowmobile camper, complete with insulation, lighting, and self-opening door. We then towed it to a cedar stand where I spent the night in it. Today we'll be towing the camper to a part of the forest that is near a maple stand, just in time for maple syrup season. While I'm there, I will collect sap from a handful of maples to boil down into maple syrup. We left the shelter clearing where I had previously been based with the camper and hit the trail for the maple stand. When we had finished towing the camper to its new location, Senior Outsider left for home while I prepared to stay the night. Last time, I heated the camper's interior using rocks which I had warmed in the fire. This time, I will use water instead of rocks to heat my camper with. I made the switch because I wanted to see which material makes the best thermal battery to heat my little shelter with. On one hand, rocks can be heated much hotter than water, but on the other hand, water seems to absorb and radiate heat more efficiently than rocks can. With all that in mind, I was curious to see what my findings would be. The ammo cans I used for the heated rocks probably held a combined weight of 45 pounds, while the water jugs held a combined weight of 88 pounds, almost double. So I must admit that my comparison between the two thermal batteries isn't exactly fair, but it's worth noting that the water was easier to gather and transport than the rocks. Plus, the rocks have only one use, whereas the water is useful for all sorts of things. I chose to pack a no-cook supper for tonight. Maple candied salmon, cheese, macaroni salad, bread, strawberries, and carrots. Easy to carry, even easier to prepare, and tasty to eat. After reheating the canteens, I went on a short walk before turning in for the night. The water heated the camper to a peak temperature of 21 degrees Celsius, slightly warmer than the rocks, which heated the camper to a peak temperature of 18 degrees Celsius on a night of similar outdoor temperature. Even though the water jugs did eventually lose their heat partway through the night, just like the rocks did, the warmth they produced kept me comfortable until morning. That's because by the time the temperature in the camper had begun to drop, I was already warm and snug underneath my blankets. Next time, I think I will wrap the water jugs in thick wool blankets to ensure that their heat loss is slowed and lengthened over the course of the entire night. I could also use the rocks and water jugs in tandem. The more thermal mass, the better. Once I had laid my head down on the pillow, it wasn't long until nighttime darkness dissolved into morning light. In the last episode, I mentioned that I wanted to find a minimalistic solar setup for my camper. something to power my lighting, charge my collection of camera batteries, and run a small heating pad. After doing some looking around, I found my solution, and it all comes down to this: a solar-compatible lithium power bank. And by the way, this is not a sponsored video. I have not been paid to show you this product. I'm just telling you about it. In researching solar energy and how to hook it up for my camper, I found that this setup, in my opinion, and in this situation, is by far the best way. And the reason for that is because as I looked at most solar setups, it was a little bit complicated and it was a little bit heavy. And that's because, first of all, you have to buy your solar panel. Then you have to buy a controller so that your power going into your battery isn't going to overload it. Then you have to buy a deep cycle battery. And then you have to buy an inverter so that you can take the power from the battery and send it to your electronics or whatever you're trying to run. So then the system becomes a little too clunky, a little too heavy. There were just too many moving parts for the setup that I wanted for such a small camper like this. So in my research, I came across the AIM-TOM power station, and what really sold me on it is that it's pretty much plug and play. So I've got the solar panel on the roof, and I just run the power cord in and plug it into the back. So there's no controller and there's no inverter because this battery does it all. It's, I guess, what you'd call a smart battery. So it regulates itself, the voltage going in, so it keeps itself from being overcharged. And of course, it also acts as an inverter because it's got all of the outlet ports there. And so it also gives out the power. And it's small, so I can just hang it in my ceiling here. In addition to running my lighting, charging all of my batteries while I'm out here. Another reason why I got this power station is because I wanted just an extra source of heat in case things got really cold at nighttime. And so what I did is when things got cooler in the middle of the night and my feet started to get a little bit cold, I have a small heating pad that I brought out with me. And what I did is I plugged it into the power station and I ran the heating pad for a few hours, and it was toasty warm. It created a lot of heat inside my blankets. As far as power is concerned, this camper is now self-sufficient. My little power bank may not be as powerful as a deep cycle battery, but it's capable of running my heating pad for 7 hours, which is all I need. If you want to check out the AIM-TOM power station for yourself, I'll be sure to link it in the description below, along with all the other equipment that I use. Anyway, I'm going to get ready now and tap some maple trees before I head home. I originally purchased a 40-watt solar panel to recharge the power station, but I think I'm going to need a bigger panel, especially during the winter months when the sun becomes more scarce. Maple sap only runs for about a month in the spring, when temperatures average -5 degrees Celsius at night and +5 degrees Celsius during the day. Gathering sap won't harm the tree if done correctly. Here's how. The depth of the borehole should be between 2 and 2.5 inches. I put some electrical tape at the 2-inch mark on my drill bit to ensure that I didn't drill any deeper than necessary. The hole should be just big enough for the spile to fit snugly inside it, which means that either a 5/16 or a 7/16 drill bit will do the job. The hole should also be drilled at a slight upward angle to help the sap flow more easily into the spile. A few gentle taps is all that's needed to set the spile in place. A heavier hammering could risk splitting the wood and harming the tree. Of course, only healthy maples should be tapped in the first place. And I don't collect sap from anything that is less than 30 inches in diameter. Some resources say that smaller maples can be tapped, but I prefer not to potentially stress the younger ones, especially when larger trees can be found. Contrary to popular belief, the holes do not need to be plugged after sap collection is complete. If the tree is healthy, which it should be since it was selected for tapping, it will begin to heal itself once the spile is removed. There are many who have claimed that the hole needs to be plugged with inferior materials, such as beeswax, dowels, or twigs, but there is no substitute for the tree's own healing ability. Within a couple years, the maple tree will have filled the hole in all by itself. For example, here's what a maple looks like a couple years after it has been tapped. The hole is sealed shut and the tree is no worse for wear. I've heard from several experienced sap collectors who have experimented with plugging spile holes as opposed to leaving them alone. These people have noted that introducing a foreign body into the tree does more damage to it than good. They said that while things looked sealed on the outside, the plugs had often begun to spread rot on the inside of the trunk. In fact, the rot could only be seen after the tree had died and been cut into. So that's why it's good to leave these trees alone to do what they do best. As a personal rule, I don't gather sap from the same tree 2 years in a row, but the general rule is that a tree can be tapped consecutively, as long as the holes are spaced at least 6 inches apart from the previous year. I tapped about 8 trees this year and let them run for several days before returning to gather the sap. My friend Koto joined me later that morning to help with the boil down. As you can see here, we'd already collected our firewood and were ready to go. At the collection stage, the sap looks and tastes like water, with only a hint of sweetness. It only becomes maple syrup once the sap has been boiled down. Boiling sap removes most of its water, allowing the sugar to concentrate. On average, it takes 40 liters of sap to make 1 liter of syrup. As the sap reduced in the pans, we made sure to keep topping them up with fresh sap until there was no more left to add. As the sap reduced further, it changed from a clear watery appearance to a pale yellow. Eventually, it will take on a beautiful amber color, which maple syrup is known for. Near the end of the day, the sap had reduced to the point where we were able to combine the pans into one.
Oh, just about dropped it.
We took the remaining sap home for the finishing boil, as the wood fire would have been too hot for the final stage. Once the sap had reached 217 degrees Celsius on the candy thermometer, it had officially become maple syrup. The 8 trees I'd collected sap from over the course of several days had produced 2 liters of maple syrup in total, which filled 4 of these half-liter jars. We gave half away to friends and family, and kept the other half for ourselves. A lot of love goes into making genuine maple syrup, but nothing can compare to how good it tastes. Maple syrup season has always been an exciting time for me, not only because I get to make maple syrup, but because it also means that building season for the log cabin will soon begin. Until next time, my friends.